Okay, you are all now being recorded, so you have been warned. So I'm going to move you all up here so I can see you. I'm going to share my screen down here, which should be Rhino. And everyone can see Rhino. Cool. All right, so far so good. The one thing I don't know if it will be recorded is your voices if you ask questions. We'll see what happens. So, anywho. So your models will likely be a majority, if not all, surface-based, different kinds of lofts, different surfaces, different ways to, extrusions and sweeps and all kinds of fun things to get your objects to a point that looks realistic, right? So there are dozens, if not hundreds, of surface editing tools in Rhino, and we're going to go through maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 or 12 of them here in the next 20 minutes. So this is kind of an intro to some of these tools. Maybe you've never used them before, or you use them all the time, but feel free to explore deeper into these toolbars as you look through, start to model your surfaces. So a lot of these tools can be grabbed from two places. They can be grabbed from this surface. If you click the little down arrow next to the surface command right here, a lot of them can be grabbed from here. And a second place up here in the main toolbar up here, I think there's more surface tools here, along with all the ones that we'll probably talk about tonight. So, to go over the basics first, which I'm sure you've all used, these top few commands. There's the plane tool, right? So the plane can be done in a few different methods. One that you probably use a lot is the corner to corner, where you just click one corner, click the next, and you have a surface. The other is the three, and there are some, modifications inside of these. We're not going to go through all of them, or maybe, so there are some things that you can change with these tools as you draw them. There's the 3-point surface where you click one point and you kind of extrude from that line. You're basically drawing a line and then extruding that line out as a surface. Pretty simple. The other one, which can be useful depending on how you're working or what views you're working in, is the vertical version. Basically a vertical version of that same tool where you draw a line but you go in the Z direction rather than the Y or X or Y, which is helpful, especially when you're modeling in the perspective view. Nothing magical about those three. The through points one could potentially be interesting. It's similar to the line one where you have a series of points. So I'll just make a bunch of points here. And then some of these points, I think I have my gumball turned on. So some of these points I'll move in a three-dimensional space. And just delete some of these tools. And if you use the through points version of that, it basically operates similar to the line one that we went over on Thursday last week, where if you click that and you select a series of points, it'll basically create a plane that's kind of the best fit plane for those points. I've never personally used that in modeling, but there's obviously a purpose for it. I just haven't found its full use yet. So that's that. I am going to skip over the cutting plane. I think just because I don't know that it's as useful of a tool as another one that we'll go over here in a few minutes. The picture one, however, I believe if anyone has used this, has anybody used the picture surface before? Some yeses, some nos. This is incredibly useful, especially if you have an object that you can get drawings of, like 2D drawing. Like if you find a JPEG of your, the plan of your lamp or the elevation of your lamp, or if you drew it, like sketched it, and you kind of like sketched it in a way that is like scalable. You can use this picture, this picture surface. So what the picture surface does is it basically asks you for a JPEG, right? So you can decide, you can find the JPEG or bitmap or whatever, image file you have, and you can choose the image you want. And once it's chosen, let's put this in the right side view. Let me just make this a little bigger. You can basically get that picture on a surface, right? The useful bit about this is that I can now scale this properly, right? So I downloaded this drawing of a Mini Cooper. It had a scale, it had a dimension on it. So now I can come in and I can draw a line. So I just typed line right there, and let me turn off my grid snap. And I can basically start at the end of this arrow, click here, and then I can draw. I'm just going to type in this dimension, so 8 foot 2 inches, and I hit enter. So now I have a line here that is 8 feet 2 inches long. So if I come back to this surface and I select the surface and I type the scale command, I want to scale the whole object. I can pick a base point and I can say, oh, I want to start at the beginning of that line, so that's my base point. And I want to pick my second reference point, so I come all the way to the end of this line, because this is this line that I want to be 8 feet 2 inches. I can click here, and then I can scale to the end point of that line. So now this should be about to scale. If I take a distance of from here up to the top of the roof of the car, you'll see it's about 4 foot 6 3/4, which probably is about correct. So if you have an object that you have a drawing of, or you do a sketch or make a drawing that's a JPEG, or if you brought it you sketched on your iPad or whatever it is, you can then bring that in here and now start to scale. So if I came in and I said, okay, I want to make these tires, I can start to draw circles that are the exact dimension of this tire and of the rim, and all this. So now that I don't have to kind of type in all these dimensions, I have the dimensions already there. So this can be incredibly useful when you're modeling objects that you have drawings of. So if you have those, and I would encourage you to look for them if you can find them. Some of your objects were a little more bespoke than a Mini Cooper, but that's a useful tool, and I'm sure you will use it at some point in your Rhino career. So those are kind of the main just plain surface tools, and that top bit. So now we kind of touched on this a little bit last week. We'll talk about the loft. Just briefly talk about the lofting tool. I don't know if you all know, but my ortho is on. F8 is the shortcut to turn your ortho on and off. So if you ever need to use shortcuts, I'm a very big proponent of the shortcut. So I'm just going to draw some weird planes here, or weird lines, I mean. Move these off into the distance. And now we can show the loft command. I know we talked about this before. So I just clicked on loft. It's asking me to pick the curves that I'm lofting. It's important that you pick them in the right order, because that's how Rhino will loft them. So I'll click them in the order I want them lofted. It lofts it. I will bring this toolbar down. I'm sure you've cycled through some of these before. There's normal, loose, which basically kind of makes a little more, makes the least complex version of the tool, but you see it's not very accurate to where my curves are. It's accurate, looks like it's pretty accurate to my end curve and start curve, but less accurate to the center curve. Tight, which means it'll hit those directly on the money, so it is 100% touching those curves on all sides. Straight is kind of making this straight angles here on the between the endpoints. Uniform, I guess, no, not 100% know what exactly uniform does, but you can tell that it is kind of changing that the way that curve is being manipulated. Obviously there's a closed loft, which basically wraps, you can see that it's kind of wrapping around and closing the end, the beginning and the end. There's, do not simplify, which kind of makes it, uses however many control points as it needs to build that curve. You can rebuild with more or less control points, but it'll get less accurate as you have less control points. But the surface will be a little bit more, it'll be a little less drastic. So if you had you drew crazy kind of tight curves, with very small geometry, it will get less accurate, but it'll make a more kind of manipulatable surface. But might not always be what you want. And I don't refit, I believe, allows you to change how the control points are dispersed across the surface. So I'm sure you've used all these before, or touched these before. Usually it's a little bit of testing them, seeing which one gets you the right shape, and finding the right combination of these tools to get you what you want. When we get to Grasshopper, the thing I don't like about these is once it's set, it's kind of, it's set. And if I came back and changed this line, nothing changes about that surface, right? When we get to Grasshopper, we will explore ways that surface is tied to those curves forever, and anytime I change that curve, the whole surface changes. We'll obviously get more into that as we go through the semester. So loft tool, I'm sure you've all used it, and if you haven't, it's very useful. Next is the sweeps. So these actually, whether you believe it or not, I feel that these next 4 tools will be critical to some of your objects. The sweep with 1 rail, sweep with 2 rails, revolve, and the rail revolve. I think these will be critical to some of your various objects, right? The simplest of them being the sweep, which I'm sure everyone has used, but we'll go over it real quick. You have what we call a rail, which is what you would like to sweep along. We have let's draw a fun shape here. We'll just make some interesting thing to sweep. So we're basically drawing a section cut of the thing that we're sweeping. I'm going to trim that a little. Trim this. Trim this. We got a weird funky shape. You can see that this is multiple curves. In order for it to be swept, we need to make sure that they're joined into one curve. So I just type the join command and I close those into one curve. So now let's move this to where we want along the rail. Move this here. Let's say, so this is something we kind of talked about. So if I kept this oriented in this direction, where it's kind of, a little bit cattywampus to the rail curve, it's going to keep that straight and sweep it along the curve. But let's say I wanted it to be perpendicular to that curve. This is where that term normal comes from. Remember we talked about last class, or maybe a class or two ago, a line that is normal. So in a curve, it's really just a line that is perpendicular. Normal and perpendicular are basically the same thing. So if I go to draw a line, I won't draw a polyline, I'll draw a line. I will turn on my perpendicular. I can Oh, it's not snapping the way I want it. Turn on my near. What's going on? Uh-oh. What did I do? Let me turn off some of these others. Tangent. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay, maybe that's coming from the curve, not at the curve. So if I start out here, it'll snap to a perpendicular spot on that curve, right? So that line is normal to that curve. So I can now move this guy into a better position, and I can rotate them into a line that is perpendicular, right? So now we'll just do a sweep. I'm sure you've done it before. You sweep with one rail. You first select the rail. You then select the cross section. When you're done, you hit enter. It kind of shows this arrow, which helps you understand how it's going to sweep. I don't fully understand why the arrow, why it points that direction, but it becomes more obvious when you're sweeping maybe multiple curves that it's not, when the kind of arrows aren't pointing similar direction. You'll know that something's probably going to go awry. So if I hit right click or hit enter, it sweeps along that curve, and I get this funky little, oops, do it again. Select rail, select curve, there we go, hit enter. So we've now swept along that curve. So that might be useful for some of you who have, some sort of handle, or something that, a cord or something like that. That might be useful for that. So the sweep along two curves, two rails, sorry. This one, trying to remember the best way to, it's the best, first rail, second rail. Let me skip that one for a second. I'm gonna just go to Revolve. I had like a method or something that was useful for that, and I'm trying to remember what it was. So let me skip that and come back. Revolve is pretty simple as well. So let me draw a curve here in the front view. So I can do something funky like this. Pull this in a little. So I can revolve, hit surface, click revolve, select curves to revolve. I can then pick the revolve axis. So we'll just pick a straight axis here. It asks you, it's your start angle, which if you're going to revolve 360 degrees, you can say 0, you can say 360, and then it'll revolve around, 360 degrees around that. It's pretty simple. I don't know why I deleted it. So let's revolve that again. I want the other direction. There we go. More of like a chalice of sorts. So if you have kind of a uniform shape, you can draw that section or that, that kind of profile and revolve around that. Now, the thing that I haven't used a lot, but when I kind of reinvestigated it for this class, I thought, oh, this actually might be useful for some of you, is the rail revolve. So let's go back to I can't remember what my sweep 2 rails one was, but let's just try it anyway. Maybe I'll remember as we do it. Let me just delete those real fast. Come down here. I'm going to draw, let's draw an ellipse as our bottom, a circle as our top. Let me go to the center here. Boop, boop. So let me just pull this up. These will be our 2 rails. And then let's draw a curve here. Didn't turn off my thing. And so now I have a curve and 2 rails. So whoop. Oops, if I don't have this so small. Just wanted to modify that line. That's really close to my so let's try to sweep this around these 2. So if I was to sweep, actually here, yeah, okay, I guess this is kind of the example I want. So let's do a single rail sweep, right? And we sweep, let's say we swept this shape just around the ellipse. So if I oops, I clicked, don't have anything selected. Let me go back to sweep 1 rail. I'll select the rail, oh, that is the ellipse, and then I will sweep this curve along that. So you see this really crazy shape that we get from this. Does anybody kind of want to know, anybody know why that shape is happening or have an idea? Any thoughts? Exactly, right? So, well, I actually boo-booed. Oh, I was even extra crazy because my rail was all cattywampus. Redo that. I'm going to set a new plane here because I don't know if you guys have ever used this. So I'm kind of off my center point here, and I'm off axis. So I'm just going to set this axis. This might be useful for some of your modeling. I'm just going to quickly draw a surface using that vertical tool here, where I have a surface, and then in this, in my front view, I'm going to go to my C-planes, and I'm going to set plane to surface. So X, which basically will make kind of that plane now the 0 point of my drawing, so I can draw and not, you know, project off into the distance. So now if I come here, turn off that, my shape again, and then I don't know why I'm changing it. I just, you know. So let's do that one more time. Let me sweep this around a single rail. Choose my rail, choose my section, sweep, and you'll see that I get a crazy looking shape, right? And similar to what I believe Earl was saying, it's basically taking that curve and it's not really rotating it around. It's just taking it and moving it kind of along that curve. It's just kind of not rotating the top portion of it. It's just taking it and moving it in that ellipse, right? So now if I, you know, take my crazy looking shape, maybe that's what you want, but chances are none of your objects, at least from my experience, look like that. So if I sweep 2 rails, surface, sweep 2 rails, I select my first rail, my second, my cross section, and then I rotate that. Still a little weird. but you'll see that the shape at the top is now, you know, kind of is circular. It's basically keeping that circular portion of the shape, but you know, we're still getting a weird looking shape, right? We're rectifying this top portion if that's what we wanted, but we still have a kind of weird. It's not rotating the way we might imagine, right? So that's where this last tool comes into play, which I think is kind of one of the more useful tools of the ones we'll talk about tonight, which is the, what is its actual name? The rail revolve, which I think will be useful for a lot of your tools. So let's actually make this even a little crazier. Just using the gumball to scale this a little bit. So let's take this and delete this for a second. And let's array this in a circle. So we're going to select that. We're going to say, so I want 1, 2, 3, 4. So I want 5. I want them to be 360 degrees. It's kind of like a neutron atom type thing. I'll accept that. Just gonna hide this real fast. I'm gonna trim this. So I'm gonna select all these, trim out the center of that, and then I'm gonna join all these together into one curve. Let me turn on my circle again. So I don't know if you've ever used that command. I just typed hide when I had the circle selected and then show to bring it back. So let's get just a nice simple curve here. And now if I use the rail revolve, or not rail revolve, yeah, is that the rail revolve? I always forget the name of it. Yeah, rail revolve. It asks me for a few things, right? So it asks me to select my profile curve, so it's kind of a little different order than the other one. So I'm going to click my profile. I'm going to click my rail curve, and now I'm going to click my axis in which they are revolving around. So I'm going to click the center of this crazy shape. I'm going to turn on my ortho, go straight up, and you'll see that it's taken that shape, that curve shape, and kind of kept and matched the that bottom shape as it's revolved it around that curve. So I think, you know, this tool could be pretty helpful when making maybe some of your, you know, pieces of your objects. If you can think of that plan, think of what that curve kind of looks like, or what that profile looks like. You may have to do some testing and see which one makes the most sense, but you know, could be useful. A few other quick tools here before we get too deep. Let me see, what did I miss? Planes, lofts, sweeps, revolve, revolve. I'm sure you've all used the cap tool, but it can be pretty important. It's pretty simple. This shape, you'll see, doesn't have a bottom or a top, but if I select it and I hit cap, it'll cap the bottom and cap the top, right? Pretty simple. But some of your shapes might be a little crazier, not have a flat bottom like this one does. And this is also you know, kind of methodology of modifying the, why is this so big? A method of kind of manipulating some forms, right? So with my gumball on, I can actually I can pick a surface or a curve or an edge of a poly surface, and I can modify just that edge. Let's see, you know, if I'm gonna get a little weird. Let me undo that. Let's not get that crazy. So I've kind of created this, you know, weird form now with it doesn't have a, you know, perfectly flat bottom. So what I did was, just so everybody knows, I Control Shift click and then selected the poly surface, when you have Control Shift, you can click pieces of objects or pieces of poly surfaces, and then you can use the gumball and shift them around. So that's kind of a useful tool, the Control Shift click. But now this tool cannot be capped. It's unable to be capped because it's all crazy looking now. The surface isn't flat, so the cap is going to work. So in those instances, and I've heard some of you say the term, so I'm sure you've used it before, you might use a patch tool, right? The patch basically does a similar thing to the cap, but instead of just capping the surface, it asks you to pick the lines that are part of the edge, really. So we'll go around here, we'll click our edge all the way around our surface. I right click to accept. Hit enter, and then it builds a mesh that best fits that surface, right? So now that is the cap of that surface. So whenever you don't have a perfectly flat open mesh or open poly surface, the patch tool might be your friend. So we could do the same thing on the top if we so desired. What else? And these 30 minutes go quick. So another tool, I don't know how useful this is it might be useful in your careers, but maybe not for your objects, is the drape tool, the drape command. I'm sure you've saw this or played with it. Super simple. You just click the drape and you pick a window over an area, and it will create a drape, basically as if you draped a surface over top of an object. Almost like if you were in a ceramics class or a glass casting class, where you would create basically the inverse of an object. So now I have a little weird looking pie tin or a cake tin. So I don't think I've ever really used that other than to drape to make something look like it had a bed had a blanket on or something. But it could be useful, if you're ever 3D printing or milling something that you then want to pour an object into. That could be useful if you model the object and then kind of use this drape command over top of it. It's not going to be perfect, but it could be useful in that regard. Drape. The one other tool I wanted to go that I think this might be pretty useful for modeling your objects is the curve from the edge, or the surface from an edge curve. I could imagine you all kind of modeling, I'm just going to delete all this for a second. I can imagine you all modeling things and you realize that you get to a point where I need, and sometimes the patch tool would be, might do the same thing if you've already modeled it. But basically drawing what the edges of a surface look like. So let me just make a, so all I'm doing, what I wanted to do. Move this guy over. It's not what I wanted. Move the top over. So for speed's sake, I'll just connect these two with lines here, connect that edge to that edge. I'm basically drawing the edge of a, all the edges of a surface. And up here, if you go, I think it's just edge curves. Oh, not planar curves. Edge curves. It's asking you to pick, 2, 3, or 4 open curves. So I'll select over these 4, and it basically creates a surface that meets all of those different lines, right? So if you knew what what those edges look like, and you kind of drew all of them and connected them the way you wanted them, and then created the surface. Might be another way to do it rather than loft. I'm not sure actually. We can do a little test and see what the difference. If I lofted these two, if I just lofted this curve and this curve, it's pretty similar. But I also have a perfectly straight line here. So like let's say if I added, I'm going to insert a knot into this. I don't know if I actually can. Yeah, I can. Curve. Come on, bud. Say I had that line like that. You know, obviously my loft won't be able to handle that, you know, that angle there, because it's going to just loft between the two curves. So that might be a place where that edge curve is useful to get that perfect match. And then I don't have to draw this kind of in-between curve to make sure that we get that straight edge out there like that. So that's already 40 minutes. I think we're going to need some time to talk about our assignment. Does anybody have, so that, like I said, there's a lot more tools. We only really went through, you know, these top 5. I'm sure you've used the extrude curve before. The edge curves we just talked about. Drape and patch we talked about. Some of these are pretty self-explanatory, like extending curve, which you can also do just by Control-Shift. Some of these, you know, if I wanted to, extended curve might be a little bit more controlled, but I can change that line, you know, by using my Control-Shift click tools. Height field from image can be an interesting thing to play with. You know, tween surfaces is similar to the tween curve command. Oh, we can talk quickly. Let's do this last thing first, or this one thing before we stop. I think these are useful tools if you haven't used them before. Let me just create something here. I'm just going to create a. Does anybody have any questions or anything while I get something built here? Are we learning anything, or are we just like, oh dang, you're talking about the same stuff that we already knew? We want more crazy stuff. I'm just drawing something interesting, whatever. I'm gonna join all these together. So these last few things are something you may have used before. Or may not, and these will become important potentially when, well, one, if you want to create drawings or diagrams, these are useful, and also if drawings or diagrams, or when you're doing surfaces, when you're creating materials for eventually for your renderings, this could become useful. So the first thing I wanted to show you is the section tool. I'm sure maybe you've used this before. Just called section, where you select. So the first thing you do is select objects, hit enter, and then draw the start of your section line, the end of your section line, and you'll see that it has created a basically a line that is a perfect section through that object, right? Pretty simple, you know, this is a pretty simple object, so it's not that complicated. But if you modeled a whole building and you were trying to do a section cut that you wanted to manipulate, that could be pretty useful. The other thing is so that's one way. There's also the contour command. So this, like I said, these are kind of useful more for maybe your when you're doing diagrams or something of your projects. Contour, so you pick the base plane. I'll draw a line perpendicular to where I want the contours cut. So I'm just going to turn on my ortho for a second, click over that direction, and then tell it how, you know, what dimension I want between the contours. So this is basically like a contour, like a topographic contour, but you can use it for models also. I'm just going to do 2 feet here, and I hit enter, and you'll see that it basically creates 100 of these, you know, or however many of those lines that are basically all section cuts throughout a whole project. So you can, you know, pull all those lines out, and let me just hide that. So you basically see it's kind of like a wire mesh of your project, or of the model that you're working on. So that's the other one I wanted to show quick, and then this one, which is pretty useful, can be useful for model building and also the creation of materials, is the unroll surface. I don't know if you've ever used that before. If you just type unroll, and you'll see unroll surface right there. If I hit, you know, clicked enter, it just wants me to select the object that I want to unroll. I hit the right click it there, and you'll see that it basically takes all the different faces of this object and makes them into individual pieces, right? Individual surfaces. This can be useful if you ever want to cut things out or model them. You know, you could print these. You probably 3D print them or CNC them. It also can be useful for building surfaces or building textures. Having a shape that is that you can kind of base your texture around. Like if you had very specific, I think some of you have like a camera or, you know, markings on your objects. You know, I don't know which one, but one of these, probably this one, is the wrapping around this, around that cylinder, so that I can basically come and flatten out my surface onto that plane and then reapply it to that surface so that I can get exactly what I wanted. So that can be pretty useful. And then the last thing that I forgot is I'm sure you've used these before, is the make 2D command. So if I select, or I won't select anything, if you just type make 2D, I select the objects I want it to draw. I right click. This tool is actually, it has a bar, where is it? Pops up with this. And, you know, it has a few different options of how you might want to draw it. So it can take this object and split it into multiple, you know, types of drawings. I'm just going to do the view for now. It asks you a layer that you want to put it on. I hit OK. And you'll see that it creates I have the hidden lines turned on. It basically creates a line drawing of that perspective that I had. Right, so if I picked a perspective that I wanted, it was a little more interesting, I could do it again. Oops, sorry, let me do it one more time. Make 2D, hit enter, the toolbar. I'll select objects to draw. The toolbar goes up here behind all your faces, and I can't see it. There it is. So I'll just do the second one, and if I hit it again, it's going to put it right here. So it basically just draws, you know, kind of a line drawing of that 3D object that you could then use for diagrams and things later in your, you know, in your projects. So that kind of hits all the topics that I had listed. Like I said, there's a lot more to the surface and the surface tools that you should look into, especially like blending surfaces, some different kind of editing tools for surfaces that you may need when you're kind of matching surfaces together. Just wanted to hit on those big ones that I think will be helpful. Any questions or concerns outright? Are we all dead today? We have a tough day. When do you all have studio? What days do you have studio? Okay. So I'm getting you on the off day between there. So you're probably like, oh God, we don't have studio today. Or maybe today's production day. And I'm literally sitting in the part of your lives that is like, oh, if I could only be producing on my studio project right this moment, that'd be so great. So I'm super in the way right now. Like I tell people in my Tech 5 class, like I went to architecture school. I know how it is. I did 5 years at Temple, and it was brutal. And I know that there are 3 levels of classes. Studio, number 1, all of your energy, time, and most of your knowledge gets shuffled into there. Number 2 is like your other architecture classes that you may or may not like, that are kind of helpful, but also kind of like, these are kind of a pain, they're right in the way. And then there's like all those other stuff that's just like, I don't give a crap about. It's just stuff I have to do to get to my degree. And I know that I'm firmly in this, I hope I'm at least in the second level category. I know I'm not in the first. So I understand, but we're here. We'll figure it out. So we can shift. If anyone has any questions right now, we can break out into groups. Everybody was good with the way we did it last time, where I brought people in from the group me. I'm getting a lot of yeses. Before we break out, we'll pick the order. And those of you who played my game, we will share. Oh, actually, we'll stop recording. Let me do that first, so that way I don't have to figure out how to cut the video down. All right.